Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little detour from the surprisingly trippy and heading straight into the terrifying. We're talking about what happens when the person wearing the crown isn't just a ruler, but a full-blown monster. Some leaders build empires, others just seem to enjoy building piles of skulls. You know, history is usually written by the victors, but what happens when the victors are just awful human beings? Absolute power, as it turns out, doesn't just corrupt. Sometimes it just pulls the pin on the grenade that is a terrible person's soul. For the men on this list, the throne wasn't a chair of responsibility. Nope. It was a stage for their cruelty and a megaphone for their madness. We're going to count down a real gallery of rogues, whose reigns are a pretty chilling reminder of what happens when you give one guy way too much power. Number 7, Henry VIII of England, 1509 to 1547. Alright, coming in at number 7 is a king everyone knows for his chaotic love life, but the real story is way darker than a few messy divorces. Henry VIII of England is infamous for his 6 wives, sure, but his tyranny went way beyond the bedroom. His whole obsession with getting a male heir led him to reshape an entire country, just to suit his personal desires. His break from the Roman Catholic Church wasn't some profound spiritual awakening. It was because he really wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and the Pope said no. That one decision threw England into decades of religious chaos and bloodshed. He made himself the supreme head of the new Church of England, basically giving himself God-tier power. He used it to dissolve all the monasteries, grab their cash, and silence anyone who had a problem with it. When a massive uprising called the Pilgrimage of Grace happened, Henry played nice, made some false promises, and then had over 200 of its leaders brutally executed as a public warning. And the more power he got, the more paranoid he became. Over his nearly 38-year reign, it's estimated he executed as many as 72,000 people. That number is just staggering. It included everyone from commoners to his closest advisors, like Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, and of course, 2 of his own queens. Both Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were beheaded on what were basically made-up charges. The thinking seemed to be if you're in Henry's way, you're not going to be for long. His legacy isn't just about being a king with a complicated marriage history. It's about a man whose ego unleashed a wave of terror that scarred a nation for generations. Number 6, Vlad III, the Impaler, 1448 to 1476. At number 6, we've got a guy whose cruelty was so legendary he literally became Dracula. That's right, Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia. His whole reputation is built on some genuinely gruesome stuff. He boiled, skinned, and beheaded people, but he got his nickname from his absolute favourite method of execution, impalement. And this wasn't a quick death. Victims were forced onto a huge, sharp stake, which was often oiled to make the agony last longer. The stake went through the torso, carefully missing vital organs, so the person could linger in unimaginable pain for hours, sometimes even days. Vlad didn't just use this for punishment, it was psychological warfare. In one famous story, he created a literal forest of the impaled, sticking 20,000 defeated Ottoman soldiers on spikes outside his capital. Imagine seeing that. It was a terrifying message to anyone thinking of messing with him. His cruelty wasn't just for his enemies either. He went after the nobles in his own land. He once invited hundreds of them to a feast, then had them all seized and impaled right there, leaving their bodies to rot in his courtyard. The stories about him are wild. Nailing hats to the heads of foreign diplomats who didn't bow properly, dining casually amongst his impaled victims. While some Romanians see him as a brutal but effective national hero, for the rest of the world, Vlad the Impaler is the benchmark for sadistic violence. A guy who really blurred the line between being a ruler and being a monster. Number 5, Caligula, R37 to 41 CE. Our number 5 spot goes to a Roman emperor whose name is basically shorthand for insane, depraved, and just plain tyrannical, Caligula. His reign started off okay, but it quickly spiraled into a 4-year-long nightmare of absurdity and terror. Ancient historians paint a picture of a man who was completely drunk on his own power. Caligula's cruelty was as creative as it was constant. He apparently found it entertaining to watch public executions while he ate his dinner. He loved humiliating the Roman elite, allegedly forcing senators' wives into orgies and then giving their husbands a performance review. There were rampant rumours of incest with his sisters, and he was accused of murder just for sport. His paranoia meant a constant stream of executions, especially of wealthy people whose property he could then seize to fund his over-the-top lifestyle. But it's the really bizarre stuff that cemented his legacy. He declared himself a living god and demanded people worship his statues. Then you have the most famous story of his madness. He allegedly declared war on the sea god Neptune. He marched his army to the beach and ordered his soldiers to literally attack the waves with their swords. Afterwards, he told them to collect seashells as the spoils of war. Whether that was a calculated act to mock his army or a sign of genuine insanity, who knows? But it perfectly captures his erratic rule. His reign of terror didn't last long, though. After 4 years, his own bodyguards, the Praetorian Guard, had enough of his whims and assassinated him. Number 4, Ivan IV, the Terrible, 1547 to 1584. At number 4, we're heading to Russia to meet a ruler whose nickname, Grozny, actually translates to something more like the Fearsome or Formidable. But trust me, his actions definitely earned him the English title of the Terrible. Ivan IV was Russia's first Tsar, and his reign was just one long dark slide into paranoia and state-sponsored terror. After his wife died, which he was convinced was a poisoning by the nobility, Ivan's already shaky personality just completely shattered. This is where things get really bad. He created the Oprichnina, his own personal police force. These guys dressed in all black, rode black horses, and carried a dog's head and a broom as their symbols, meaning they were there to sniff out treason and sweep it away. For years, these guys were Ivan's personal goon squad, unleashing hell on Russia, carrying out mass executions and torturing anyone Ivan even suspected of being disloyal. His most famous atrocity was the 1570 massacre of Novgorod. He became convinced the entire city was plotting against him, so he led his oprichniki on a month-long rampage. Thousands were systematically slaughtered in the most horrific ways imaginable. Men, women, and children were tied to sleds and driven into a freezing river. His cruelty was deeply personal, his fits of rage were legendary, and it all culminated in 1581 when, during an argument, he struck and killed his own son and heir with a pointed staff. When Ivan the Terrible finally died, he left behind a kingdom that was traumatized and scarred by the violent paranoia of its first Tsar. We're about to hit our top 3, and believe me, the stories involve cruelty on a scale that is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Before we get to that, if you're finding this trip into history's dark corners as fascinating as I do, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. That way you won't miss out on our future explorations into the most shocking stories from the past. Number 3. Timur Tamerlane, 1370 to 1405. Entering our top 3 as a conqueror whose military brilliance was matched only by his absolutely staggering brutality, Timur, also known as Tamerlane. This guy carved a bloody path across Asia, and while some conquerors like to build, Timur seemed to just revel in destruction. His campaigns are estimated to have caused the deaths of up to 17 million people, a high-end estimate for sure, but a figure so huge it would have been around 5% of the entire world's population at the time. His method was simple and horrifying. Either you submit completely or you get completely annihilated. Cities that resisted weren't just defeated, they were erased from existence. His cruelty was his brand. After conquering Isfahan in Persia, he ordered a massacre of its 70,000 citizens, and then commanded his soldiers to build monuments out of their severed heads. They built more than 24 towers of skulls as a warning. That was his calling card. In India, after taking Delhi, his army went on a rampage that left the city a smoking ruin. During the siege of Baghdad, he ordered every one of his soldiers to bring him back at least 2 severed heads. When they ran out of enemies, they started beheading prisoners they'd already captured. Some stories say soldiers even killed their own wives to meet the quota. Timur was less a conqueror, and more a force of nature, a storm of violence who left behind a legacy of devastation and pyramids of skulls. Number 2. Genghis Khan, 1206 to 1227. At number 2 is a name that brings both awe for his military genius and absolute horror for his methods: Genghis Khan. He united the Mongol tribes and created the largest land empire in history, but it was an empire built on a foundation of millions and millions of corpses. Modern historians figure the Mongol conquests may have killed somewhere between 20 to 40 million people. The devastation was so profound, it might have been 10% of the entire world's population. Now, to be clear, the Mongol strategy was a brutal form of psychological warfare. If your city surrendered, you were usually spared. But if you resisted, you faced total annihilation. Not just a battle, but systematic extermination. Entire populations were slaughtered. The scale is just hard to process. When they conquered the city of Nishapur, ancient historians claim they killed over 1.7 million people. Now, that number is almost certainly an exaggeration from the time, but the massacre that did happen was undeniably horrific. In another city, Merv, the death toll was reportedly over 1 million. They used terror as a weapon, deliberately spreading these stories to encourage surrender. They were even pioneers of biological warfare, catapulting plague-ridden bodies over city walls. So while Genghis Khan was a brilliant strategist, the price of his ambition was a death toll of apocalyptic proportions. Number 1, King Leopold II of Belgium, 1865 to 1909. And now our number 1 pick. This one is different. He didn't rule in some brutal ancient past. He was a modern king. He wasn't a warrior leading armies on the battlefield. He was more like a CEO king who ran a personal colony, with a level of greed and cruelty that is just staggering. He is King Leopold II of Belgium. Under the guise of a humanitarian mission to civilize Africa, Leopold somehow convinced the world to give him personal control over a huge territory he called the Congo Free State. This wasn't a Belgian colony. It was his private property, an area about 80 times the size of Belgium, and he turned it into a massive slave labour camp for his own personal profit, first from ivory and then rubber. To get this wealth, he created a private army, the Force Publique, that terrorized the local population into meeting impossible work quotas. Villagers who failed to collect enough rubber-faced punishments that are hard to even speak about. The most infamous was mutilation. The hands of men, women, and even little kids were severed as a penalty for slow work. Entire villages were burned down. Women were kidnapped to force their husbands to work harder, and mass killings were just part of the business model. The result was a demographic catastrophe. While the exact numbers are debated by scholars, it's now estimated that during Leopold's rule, somewhere between 10 to 15 million Congolese people died from murder, exhaustion, starvation, and disease. It was a holocaust driven by pure, simple greed, all orchestrated from a palace in Brussels. Leopold never even set foot in the Congo. His crimes were eventually exposed by journalists and activists, leading to an international outcry that forced him to give up control. His reign is a chilling testament to the absolute worst of colonialism and the boundless depravity of a king who saw millions of human beings as nothing more than an obstacle to his personal bank account. From the paranoid tyranny of Henry VIII to the industrial-scale greed of King Leopold II, these monarchs really represent the absolute worst of humanity. Their legacies aren't carved in stone monuments, but in the mass graves and the collective trauma of the people they brutalized. It's a pretty stark reminder that a crown doesn't make someone noble. It just gives them more power to unleash the darkness they already have inside. But history is filled with countless rulers, and depravity takes many forms. Who did we miss? Let me know in the comments below which ruler you think deserved a spot on this list. And if you found this dive into history's dark side compelling, be sure to subscribe because we might just turn our sights to the most brutal queens in history next. Thank you for watching.